When the Doctor gave the Brigadier a space-time telegraph system, he told him to use it only when there was a real emergency on Earth. So, when the Doctor received the call, he was naturally quick to respond, taking a detour only to present a series of movies for BBC One's Disney Time, during which he interrogates a random man on whether or not he knows Mickey Mouse and Donald Duck. After introducing us to The Jungle Book and other such Disney classics, the Doctor says,
"It's from the Brigadier."
"Yet we already know, mate. Whose hand is this?" Someone here isn't taking Doctor Who seriously. Anyway, enough about that. Doctor Who meets Disney. It was a different world back then. It's 1975, distinguished followers. The Philip Hinchcliffe era of Doctor Who was known to dip its toes in myths and borrow narratives from classic literature and all popular sci-fi stories of the era. I consider Terror of the Zygons to be a sort of mix of a lot of these things. At its core, this thoroughly enjoyable four-parter is, well, very Scottish. Conversations about haggis, Angus playing the bagpipes, kilts, and the most Scottish thing in the entire history of Scotland, the Loch Ness Monster. The story's writer, Robert Banks Stewart, being a native Scot himself, wanted a Highland set adventure based around the enigmatic Nessie, and so we get a Doctor Who story that poses a solution to the great mystery of Loch Ness. What is the Loch Ness Monster, I hear you ask? It is, of course, an alien cyborg. As was occasionally the case with classic Doctor Who, this story gradually shifted focus throughout its production. Arguably the biggest caveat for the production of this story was that due to budget restrictions, this Loch Ness-based episode was no more filmed in the Loch Ness than the moon base was filmed on the moon. Instead, it was filmed in various locations of the south-east of England, the bottom of Britain instead of the top, including this attractive pub in Sussex. They do the best with what they have. You got hills, lakes, villages, fog, all the trimmings. But the potential was definitely diminished, and we will never know how much nicer this serial would have looked had the location been authentic. It also went down from an intended 6 episodes to 4, and became as much about these fellas as it did anything else. When Harry Sullivan is captured by the Zygons during the story, they explain to him that selected humans provide them with body prints, a Zygon device doubtless beyond our understanding. Except I do understand it, they're doing the invasion of the body snatchers thing. They are doing the invasion of the body snatchers thing, right? Or was that more what the android invasion was meant to be, because it also had otherworldly entities masquerading as humans? Maybe Terror of the Zygons is more like the Invaders then. A Quinn Martin production, you know that one. I don't know. You know the drill. Shapeshifters. Interesting concept. Almost doesn't need to feature in the story because there's enough going on already, but it does add an interesting dimension, that's for sure. In all fairness, I think this story pivots pretty smoothly from one concept to another, and the result is a pretty neat and undeniably fun adventure. Of course, many may consider the big elephant in the room to be the ropey visual delivery of the big sea monster in the capital. Well, I ain't one of those people, and I'll explain more on that as we go. Terror of the Zygons could also be considered a goodbye of sorts to the old unit gang, with Benton appearing only once more after this serial, and Lethbridge himself gone until the Davison era. The unit doing stuff that we all know and love kind of ended here, with unit showing in force only twice more after this for the duration, and the second one of those was Major Beresford and his boringly efficient team of soldiers who did things with relative competence. Dull. But as far as the chosen chimp is concerned, this is a worthy send-off because Unit are marvellous pillocks throughout this story. So much so that it's better for me to talk about them as and when it happened, rather than condense it into one big segment. It would just go on for flipping ever. Whilst the closing story of Series 13, Seeds of Doom, is technically the definitive final military-based present-day Earthbound story in Classic Who for the long term, Terror of the Zygons feels more so just like the real thing. That vintage Pertwee era charm that we all know and adore, bowing out in pleasantly chaotic fashion. And on that note, I'll say it again, rest in peace, Richard Franklin. There is a creature
with strangely moving eyes, a snapping jaw, and a slightly ropey stop-motion body. But enough about me. Let's talk about the Scaris, aka the Loch Ness Monster. Now, Series 13 of classic Doctor Who has yet to have been released on Blu-ray, but when it is, whenever that may be, I highly suspect that the Scaris will be targeted for some heavy updating of special effects. And I, for one, sincerely hope they do not do this. Guess what, distinguished followers? I love the Scaris in all its ropey glory. You know I do. It's kind of... It's a window into the past, it's a time capsule, it's a product of its era, and yes, it probably could have been done better if there was more due diligence, if there was more time on the hands of the production team, but what we got is what we got. The end result is something that became embedded in our hearts and our minds and our love and appreciation, you know? And for that to change and for that to be wiped by something that is supposedly more modern, I think is a bad move. I don't think it works. I think it really clashes to have these updated tropes in classic stories. And I think the biggest and most glaring example of this, certainly the most recent, is the colorized version of Doctor Who and the Daleks, which landed on iPlayer in celebration of the 60th. All that new music, all that swanky new editing, some new effects thrown in. And I just don't think any of it works. I think this attempted fusion, old and new, it just creates a clash. So I wasn't a fan of that. And I'm not really a fan of people trying to put new things in old stuff. Just because something's ropey doesn't mean it can't be cool. And I find the Scaris to be a good example of that. It's kind of silly looking and it's fine, you know. You get these things all throughout classic Doctor Who, you know, the isms, the Hartnellisms, the Troughtonisms, Pertweeisms, Bakerisms, and so on and so forth. The wobbly props, the extras slipping over. It just becomes part of the thing. It becomes legendary. And people responsible for bringing these new releases, I think, need to keep that in mind. So, BBC, if you're watching this, and I know that you're not, please leave the Scaris alone. He's fine. He's absolutely fine. Thanks to Andy Collin for requesting that I review Terror of the Zygons over on Patreon. I hope you enjoy this review, mate, and thank you so much for requesting it last year. You can still become a distinguished follower over on Patreon for just £1 a month. Visit patreon.com/chosenchimp, where you can become a distinguished follower and request your favourite classic Doctor Who story for review. Maybe just skim through my channel and make sure that it isn't one I've done already, and please no Dalek or Cybermen stories. Dalek stories I am going to start right back from the beginning where it all began, and the Cybermen stories I'm doing a kind of slow trickle through them anyway, in case you haven't noticed. But the rest is fair game, as long as it isn't one I've done already. So please hop on board, and for everyone else who sticked around and requested and they still haven't seen their requests, I'm on it and I am prioritising it above all else, I can assure you. Thank you very much, everybody. Back to you, Studio Chimp.
Thanks, you sexy crumpet. So this right here is an oil rig being destroyed. What a lovely model. It's got its own little bitty helicopter and everything. And this right here is a dead body washed ashore from the wreckage. Oh no, wait, he's not dead. Oh no, wait, yes he is. Hibernian Oil has lost 3 whole rigs to the North Sea in mysterious circumstances, meaning UNIT have commandeered a pub. But they are truly out of their depth without the Doctor to berate them for humanity's senseless dependency on a mineral slime when they should be energising hydrogen instead, and Sarah Jane laughing somewhat crassly at Lethbridge's Scottish heritage. Anyway, I don't know why the Doctor is banging on about the definition of emergencies when he spent the last week looking for Mickey Mouse, but here we are. The Duke of Forghill owns most of this here land, and according to Angus, the best piper in the village, has been acting strangely ever since the rigs have appeared. Understandable when most of his clan have gone to work for the big companies, but of course there is more to it than that. In this very pub, the Zygons are spying on them. Their method of spying is nothing if not inventive, and, well, not exactly subtle. I'm sure any moderately cerebral person can swiftly detect that this is actually... oh, for goodness sake. The Zygons have been terrorising the locals since the late 1800s, so much so that local superstition has run riot, and it is said that only bad luck come to those who settle on Tulloch Moor. And that, guys, explains everything, all the folklore around Loch Ness and its mysterious monster. This cartoon right here, for example, it's because of the Zygons. Their leader is Broton, the Zygon without a soul, and the warlord for this particular batch. He explains later in the story that their craft was damaged centuries ago. They landed here to await rescue and recently learned that their homeworld was destroyed in a stellar explosion. So now they are going to change the destiny of planet Earth and make that their homeworld instead. Get in line. Now, I gotta tell you categorically and somewhat subjectively that I think these monsters work as well as any creature ever had in classic Doctor Who up until this point. Their unwavering ruthlessness, similar to the Ice Warriors in that regard, gives them a true villainous purity. But it's not just that. I think visually they look the biz. All slimy with their suckers, their appearance is nicely horrid. And besides the fact that the actors often seem to be looking over their noses due to the encumbersome headpieces, they just look really credible as an alien threat, and effectively sea monster-ish. Yeah, they got massive heads, but I don't know, most things did back in those days, didn't they? All round, it's just a really good design for an evil Doctor Who creature, capable of pulling out the scary card in a number of instances, especially that classic episode cliffhanger moment when one sneaks up behind Sarah Jane. The same goes for their ship. Superb set. Their control console is kinda like a TARDIS control console, but it's all wet and greasy with sucker things that the Zygons caress in a mildly seedy fashion. Couple set with monster and you've got a winning combo that bonds perfectly. I love the red light pulsating on their faces throughout this adventure. Sinister and evil cranked up to 11. And yeah, they also do the shape-shifting thing. That red and black special effect that's in, like, pretty much every Tom Baker episode. It just works. The Chimp approves. Please, never change this. So the Doctor discovers strange marks in a piece of wreckage and is soon to deduce that they are from teeth belonging to whatever this scaly thing is, bringing him to the attention of Broton. Meanwhile, Harry is shot in the head after he discovers the ill-fated Haggis man rolling down a hill, spoiling Sarah Jane's attempt to ridicule the Scottish tongue down the phone. Her and the Doctor then visit Harry, who is being looked after by this massively trustworthy nurse. And that's it, they've all been gotted. That's Harry prisoner there, and Sarah Jane in a decompression chamber there, with the Doctor getting roped into this diabolical scheme almost immediately afterwards. You see, among their many other talents, Zygons are also good with wheels, switches, and cupboard doors. So commences a somewhat bizarre scene where the chamber is drained of oxygen, prompting the Doctor to hypnotise Sarah into not breathing, a trick that he apparently learned from a Tibetan monk. What he probably didn't learn from a Tibetan monk is telling his companion to shut up and save her breath. Sheesh. With that sort of taken care of, UNIT also find themselves in grave danger, having been locked in the very pub they have commandeered while it's filled with gas. But the fate befalling them is nothing compared to the horrors suffered by this poor young soldier as he walks through the fog. Cue our first shot of... nope, don't call it a Loch Ness monster, it's a Scarison, a creature that came to Earth as an embryo, and since that time, the Zygons have converted it into a cyborg of devastating power. I should probably also add that the Zygons apparently depend on its lactic fluid for survival. You don't actually see that. which I'm kind of glad about. Whatever the case, judging by the expression on Benton's face later in the episode, the Scarison took a real bite out of this poor fella. It's controlled by a Trillanic, can't quite remember, activator which the Doctor is now in possession of, having found it on the wreckage of the oil rig. The Zygons want it back, so cue the most evil character in classic Doctor Who. Evil Harry. Well, I say he's evil, he's not the best. He manages to nab the device off Sarah while she's writing a journalistic piece titled Another Bermuda Triangle. No, it's the Loch Ness, mate. And then later tries to kill her with a pitchfork. Side note, I love how Sarah pursues evil Harry with 3 unit soldiers in tow, but then just gives up on them and goes it alone. They're like lost puppies. But then he falls off the hay bales and dies. Yeah, you better get rid of that evidence, Broton. I would. It's just embarrassing. Broton then responds in kind by making the signalling device wobble and move, which in turn calls forth the Scarison. And in a moment of characteristic self-sacrifice, the Doctor springs into action, attempting to lure the Scarison away by taking the tracker away from anyone else nearby. Bessie has pretty much retired post-Pertwee, so instead he takes a unit Land Rover, which craps out halfway into the journey, causing him to leg it on foot. Remember, it's a 70s Doctor and you're running away from a monster, so you should probably trip up at some point. There you go. And springing into action is good Harry, who fearlessly runs to the control console and grabs on a plethora of slimy appendages. Valiant effort. The monster walks off and Broton indulges in the assumption that the Doctor is dead just because the signal is slightly switched off or something. So, what else is going on? Oh yeah, unit is searching for bugs. Why don't you try the deer head with the massive eyes, Benton? The one that kind of looks like the Doctor. It's actually Angus the Piper that sees its eyes move. Imagine how freaky this would have been if the viewers never actually learned what was on the other side. He becomes obsessed with dismantling it, then Zygon Nurse shows up. Dead. Unit Soldier clobbered. United once again, the Doctor and co pay a visit to the Duke of Forgill at his very own castle, who scoffs at the very notion of a Loch Ness monster. But I think we've all figured it out by now, he's one of them. Once left alone to do all the proper work, Sarah Jane uses a very nice ladder to pull out the book with the mouldy pages and voila, a secret door. Turns out the Zygon ship was part of the castle and also deep underwater. How does that work? Oh right, there's a tunnel going down. Okay, well that explains it. She rescues Harry and tags the Doctor back into the Zygon ship, who subsequently makes this sound. Naturally, the Brigadier isn't taking this lying down and oh my life, who gave these guys a mortar? I'd stand back if I were you, Harry. Whilst Unit commence the blowing up of everything, Sarah Jane rather sensibly brings up the issue of the Doctor being down in the lake that they're currently bombing, to which the Brigadier says, "We'll explode the first couple high. That'll bring them to the surface." First couple? Those poor fish. Well, it brings the Zygons to the surface, all right. Their ship leaves its watery sanctuary and heads for the sky. A mortar. Beggars belief. All of Britain's radars are jammed now. The Zygons hope to prep the Earth for an invasion fleet that will arrive centuries from now, and it starts with an infiltration and attack of an international energy conference full of VIPs from around the world. So long Loch Ness and hello London, I guess. And an epic battle between Time Lord and mythological cyborg monster thing. The Brigadier promises Madam Prime Minister. It's commonly accepted that he's talking to this one who has yet to reach Helen A status at the time of recording this episode, but I've also read that Nicholas Courtney ad-libbed the line under the premise that future PM might also have been Shirley Williams of the Labour Party, so go figure. Anyway, he promises Madam Prime Minister a discreet and resolute solution. Can't see it happening. But before this, the Doctor is marvellously sarky with the Zygons and Broton, who has permanently taken on the Duke form. He pulls an electric thing that makes him scream again and signals Unit to his position. Apparently that's him underestimating the power of organic crystallography. Yeah, you don't want to do that. Then he sets off the Zygon ship's fire alarm, sets the human originals free and gets his mischievous hands on the self-destructor. Another 70s Doctor Who model blown up. Excellent. It's just Broton left now. Once he infiltrates the conference, he Zygons up and has a noisy fight with the Doctor. The Brigadier stands there and watches as Broton kills one of his men and then shoots him. And finally, the main event. Just some sounds of screaming and sirens accompanied with a bobbing head to convey this Scarison attack on London. Hey, it works for me. The Doctor throws the Trilanic activator, which, let's face it, was the real star of this story, into Robo-Lock's jaws, causing the Scarison to disappear into the Thames, and then return to the Loch Ness, the only home it knows. A self-fulfilling prophecy. Actually, it's not that at all, is it? So all is good in the Tulloch, with Harry opting out of rejoining the Doctor on his adventures and Sarah Jane being the only one to hop back into the TARDIS, on the condition that she's taken straight to London, and definitely not the edge of a time-space vortex.
So long, Brigadier. You will be missed for that handful of years before you turn up in a Peter Davison episode. But during that time, people will feel the absence of your wisdom, your unrelenting sarcasm, and the somewhat avant-garde way of describing things that you sometimes use. For Terror of the Zygons, for all its other delights, is also the story where the Brigadier described an oil rig as reminding him of a three-legged spider in Wellington boots. What are your thoughts on Terror of the Zygons? And more importantly, what does an oil rig remind you of? Sound off in the comments, and don't forget to hit subscribe. Have a good one.